Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from depending on which part of the world you are joining in from. Um, you know, Today we are here with another session of Hot Briefing from brought to you by the Technology Council Foundation. Um, and I, along with my co-host Visharup. Hi, Visharup.
Hello Debarshi, hello everyone. Welcome back again to the Hot Briefings.
Hi, hi. So we are today going to bring up, and we today have a very interesting topic, especially in this world of internet, so many subscription-based services. Um, a new kind of pattern or dark pattern is, something which is evolved and which is very pertinent to every, the day-to-days of our lives. And to talk about it and the legal implications and how these dark patterns really affect us, we have a very special person, a legal, a counsel, a lawyer joining in, Hana Boston, who's really worked deeply into in these areas. So Hana has extensive experience in not just counseling technology companies and technology firms, but also building software, building technology, and managing products. Um, she regularly interacts with the engineering departments, the business departments, and really fosters the collaboration between the different teams, and really builds products, ensures compliance. She's currently director legal counsel at Gartner. Hello, Hannah, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Devarshi. Hi, Bisarupus. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And hello, everyone who's joined. Super excited to talk about this topic.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Hannah, for having joined in.
All right. So, Hannah, dark patterns have become a part and parcel, I would say, in our lives, right? Globally, wherever we are, if we have access to internet, we're probably using some services, and we do get to see these various kinds of user interfaces, and we're not really sure of what we are really signing into, right? So can you provide us a brief explanation, right, before we get into any further details? Can you provide a brief explanation of what dark patterns are and how they are really used in various digital platforms?
Yeah, for sure. So, when we talk about dark patterns, there are things that we see all the time, and they coined this phrase dark patterns to kind of encompass this area of these design techniques that are used in user interfaces to manipulate or deceive users into taking certain actions that they may not have taken on their own, right? Or they may not have wanted to take. They're employed in digital platforms, websites. You see it a lot on commerce sites as well. We'll talk more about the different examples, but you'll see the little pop up. One I've been seeing lately when I'm shopping is they'll say, someone just purchased this item in the US, right? Or hey, hurry up, it's going now. So we've seen these kind of things, and they give you that particular dark pattern a sense of urgency, right? We'll get more into the different types later on, but these are the type of areas or things that you see when users are interacting with different websites that feel manipulative, and that's really the main issue with these dark patterns. They exploit like psychological vulnerabilities such as cognitive bias, impulsive behavior, to try to steer them towards an action that doesn't benefit the user necessarily. It's not for the benefit of the user, but more for the benefit of the platform. And it's very interesting space, especially as a legal counsel trying to advise companies on this area, because the reality is it does have short-term gains. You know, when you look at your conversions, when the company looks at its conversions, when the company looks at, you know, how many people are clicking or buying, etc., auto renewing, you know, that's a whole different area, can of worms, that are, you know, signing up for their auto renewal, etc., they do see gains. So it's a very interesting place for an counsel, in-house counsel in particular, to be, because you're talking to the business that's like, no, 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 we're getting, this is working, and you're like, it is working, but it's manipulative or it's deceptive, and trying to like strike that balance between wanting the business to grow, because we all work for businesses, in-house counsels, right? Like we want them to grow, we want them to succeed, but also keeping in mind, you know, our users, and making sure that what we're doing as a business, making sure that what the business is doing is not crossing over into manipulation or deception. So
Fantastic. I mean,
it's short term, but long term, it can have, you know, kind of negative consequences. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no, all good, all good. I mean, before we get into the deep legalities of it, I mean, we need to understand, we would want to understand that what are the kind of legal issues with respect to it, and how to navigate through these kind of legal issues, and make sure that on one side the dark pattern doesn't affect the consumers, and on the other side the businesses remain safe. um, I wanted to ask you, Hannah, that if you could help our viewers with some common examples of dark patterns that, say, a consumer may encounter when they are having and say purchasing online, right? They're having some online experience, and if you could connect them to how that impact the user behavior and the decision making, what a user would do, and what a user would do otherwise when there was no dark pattern. I mean, if you could give a sense about it, about some of these examples.
Sure. You know, it's hard to quantify what a user would do if they didn't have those in front of them, right? Um, you know, but it's hard to say what they would do if that dark pattern wasn't in front of them. However, with that said, there are some things that we all see, and I know I've had to see them quite a bit. I've seen them quite a bit before I was actually in this space, and then as I've been, you know, advising different companies in different business sectors on these practices. So, one that's very common is misdirection, right? You'll we call it like clickbait. So you'll click on something thinking that you're going one place or thinking that you're purchasing one thing, and then it'll redirect you to something else. And maybe eventually, I mean, the most egregious is that you never get to what you were looking for. And but you still see it, where they'll have you click through, I don't know, 20 screens with pop-ups, all with advertising, before you can get to what you actually tried to click on, you know, what you were trying to view, right? So obviously that's problematic, right? They're trying to keep you within the interface and participating in the website when you really were just trying to go for one thing and you may have already clicked out. Another that happens quite frequently are hidden costs. So, you know, when you go to check out and you say, oh, okay, well, this is how much this costs, this is how much I'm going to spend on it, and then all of a sudden you see that insurance tacked on the bottom that you didn't notice, and it's usually I mean, again, the hidden cost, if it's really egregious, usually most users will say, whoa, 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 that extra $100, that's not what I was trying to spend. But a lot of times it'll be a $5 charge or a $10 charge or something that could really easily be missed, especially for you know, users who are just going very quickly, right? You know, you're trying to purchase something, or even with all the different payment options we have to purchase things quickly with your Apple Pay in the US, and other platforms globally, you just kind of keep going and you don't always check those hidden costs. Um, forced continue Forced continuity. That's when they make it difficult for you to cancel subscriptions. I've been here. I'm sure most of our viewers have been here where you're trying to cancel and they just make it as difficult as possible. You have to send an email, you have to call. Now, we'll get into some of the legal regulations a bit later in the discussion, but that is something that a lot of countries are trying to control in different regulations. So you'll notice as we go through these dark patterns, there are certain areas that there is additional consumer protection that are attached to these, but there's nothing right now that kind of encompasses them all. Another is sneak into a basket that's adding something to the shopping cart that they did without the consent, the buyer's consent. Roach Motel, I love the way that this one is called. Roach Motels, where you have the roaches go in but they can't get out. So that's making it easy to sign up for services, but really difficult to cancel or leave. Social proof, manipulating users by showing fake social endorsements or testimonials. Urgency, I think I talked about that a little earlier, where got to get it now, it's going fast, right? You only have 5 more minutes for this deal. And then auto checked boxes. So this particularly comes up and it's seen most frequently in kind of the privacy area, the opt-in, opt-out, and they'll auto check the opt-in box and you have to click to opt out versus having to click to opt in. Again, this is another area that there are some laws and regulations that are trying to target and deal with these types of things, particularly like the auto checked boxes that comes up quite frequently in the opt-in, opt-out. But there's nothing that really takes into consideration all of these as a whole, so it's a little bit piecemeal at the moment. So those are just some. That's not a comprehensive list, but those are just some of the frequent ones.
Very, very interesting thing that you brought out, Hannah. I just wanted to, for the Indian viewers, and they will connect. So it's very common that while there are some websites where we go on to book the tickets, the airline tickets, and right at the end, just before I'm about to pay, there is this one small tick which is already ticked and which says that, do you want to donate this 2 rupees for this cause, right?
Yes.
And then when I go on to unselect it, right, for whatever reason, and then it comes up with a pop-up and say that, do you really do not want to donate to this cause? And it
Exactly.
troubles me somewhere, right? So thank you for bringing this up, because a lot of us as viewers, we do not actively notice this kind of a cue. And the second, there's so many examples to my mind right now. One another example is, we see this YouTube pop-up advertisements, these coming up on your face advertisements, which say that, hey, I am a millionaire. Why are you not a millionaire? And can make you a millionaire within 5 days, right? Or maybe join. Finally, at the back of it, there is a course, which essentially is what they're trying to sell. And they would like to essentially go on to sell these courses to themselves becoming a millionaire. But that's what they're saying, that you can be a millionaire. Just go ahead and buy. Why don't you come in and I'm going to teach you how to become a millionaire. So thank you. This is definitely a very pertinent issue today. And I just wanted our viewers to get pointed to this fact that this whole field of study essentially came in not very long back. 2010, I believe, is when this darkpatterns.org was registered, and where they go on to track each of these user activities, user experience, user interface related pieces, where which kind of these activities on the websites can be considered to be dark patterns is what they continue to track. So I just wanted the users to know that this is one place where people can go ahead and submit what a dark pattern is if they have noticed something. And post this session of ours, hope people would know, a lot more people would know and would want to go ahead and submit when they see a dark pattern. That's one of the things. Now, moving on, Hannah, I would like to ask you this question that, now getting into the legal part of it, what are the kind of legal, ethical implications associated with the use of such kind of, dark patterns? If you could now take our viewers into that part of the story.
Yeah, for sure. There's several legal and ethical implications. One of the things that a lot of us as attorneys that support technology companies have seen is that the technology moves a lot faster than the regulations, right? So one of the common questions I get from my business partners are, what do the regulations say? And it's an interesting place that we have to navigate, right? Sometimes there are regulations and sometimes there's not specific regulations, but it really comes down to what type of business you want to be. So when we think about the legal and ethical implications, deception and manipulation, right? We're trying to force users into taking an action where they may not fully understand, they may not fully consent to, and this violates the principles of transparency and honesty. User autonomy. We're tricking users into coercing or doing something that might not align with their preferences. Regulatory compliance. Depending on the jurisdiction, and as we talked about the different dark patterns, some of those are more regulated than others, right? They all kind of fall under consumer protection generally, but some of them have more specific regulations, like the opt-in, opt-out, the auto renewals, things like that, where others don't have very specific regulations. They just kind of fall into this realm of shadiness, right? And even just the word dark patterns in itself, especially in a business sense, one of the companies that I was working for and advising, our general counsel was like, "Don't say dark patterns. It sounds so, ominous." And I said, "Okay, well, what do we call them? I guess we can call them deceptive design techniques."
like the defense against the dark arts,
And it totally sounds like super ominous, like we're doing something super shady. And I think that there's also that there's a balance that has to be struck, right? You don't want to stop. You want to advise the business, but you also want to encourage innovation and encourage growth, right? You want the business to grow, but not at the expense of the user. And I think that's really where that balance comes in. So, you have regulatory compliance, some, like the GDPR, they require explicit consent for data processing activities. But generally speaking, a lot of these are not specifically regulated. Reputational damage, I think that's a really big one for companies to consider. You think about the short-term implications. Hey, we're getting a lot more, we're selling more stuff, we're getting a lot more conversions, we're getting a lot more clicks, we're getting a lot more views. But that's really short-term, because long-term, and we've all experienced this, I'm sure, that you're like, I'm not going to that website a lot anymore. I don't care if that article sounds really interesting. I know if I click on it, I'm going to have to go through 20 pages before I find out, the picture of, Beyonce's daughter or whatever. So it really just, it affects the reputation. And that's something that's really difficult to quantify, but so important. Once your user, buyer, viewer, etc., loses trust with your site, it's really hard to come back from that. My grandmother used to say, trust is easy to lose and hard to get back. Long-term consequences, we talked about that. Ethical responsibilities. Look, at the end of the day, especially as in-house counsels, we want to encourage businesses to operate in an ethical manner, right? We want them to have ethical responsibility, prioritize the well-being and respect user autonomy. So I think that's really important for us to always encourage our business partners to keep that in mind. You know, businesses should prioritize these ethical design practices and transparency to maintain positive relationships and, of course, avoid potential legal consequences. Because although the law may be slow, when it comes quite fast and can be very expensive.
Right. And, and sometimes I think it becomes really difficult, right? Like with if the law is not really pointing, and you know, I'm sure you look at you know, compliances with these laws globally, right? And globally there may not be, you know, such strict standards as the GDPR or as the e-privacy directives, right? So I mean, how do you really communicate to your business if the law is not very clear, right? I mean, isn't it like a difficult? I find it quite difficult, you know, when there's not a specific law with respect to this, but we know that this is wrong.
Right. Right. You know, that's a very good point. And it's something as product counsels that I think we all have to deal with, not just product counsel. I think it happens most frequently with product counsels because we're in those rooms having those conversations daily, hourly, with the product managers and the engineering teams. But even on the commercial legal side, you still have to have these conversations to some extent, right? As you advise the business on how their services and products work and what their consumers or how they're interacting with it and what they're buying, right? So, you know, it's a little bit of a dance, I would say. One of the ways that I try to do it is, of course, you know, and you'll hear this from product counsels whenever we're speaking, is build the relationships, right? Build that trust with the teams that you're servicing. You can't, in other areas of law, for example, maybe litigation, maybe it's easier to go in and just say no, because you have very clear laws and it's black and white, and you know what you can do and what you can't do. That's easy, right? It's these areas where it's not quite developed, and you still have to advise them, you know, talking to the business, understanding from your general counsel and your legal team what your risk appetite is as a business, right? I think that's very important for the attorneys to understand what that risk appetite is. I mean, the reality is many times innovation doesn't come without pushing those boundaries, right? Without asking those questions. And that's something as in-house counsels that we always have to keep in mind. But understanding what the risk appetite is, the way that I usually explain it is like, all right, you're driving. Do you want to be at the front? Do you know, of the line of traffic where you might, you know, be bumped up and, you know, hit somebody and have a collision, right? Do you want to be at the back where you're going to be waiting in line for like hours and hours and hours and you might never get there because you're too slow, right? Or do you want to be kind of in the middle of the road, you know, where you're doing the things you're supposed to be doing. You are keeping your users in mind. You know, you have these ethical considerations. You have an ethical framework, but you may not be pushing the limit, but also, you know, speeding in the front and about to crash, but also not behind the curve, so it slows innovation. But that really is a business decision to make. And these are conversations we really have to have. So many times the legal department that I've seen, legal departments kind of work in a silo, right? They talk about these things amongst themselves, but it's really important to get the business input and have them understand where we are and have those conversations, you know, across the different business functions, I think.
Right, right. I mean, as legal, as product counsels, we always face, hey, we've been doing this for years. Why is it a problem suddenly now? This other company XYZ, you know, they are doing it. Why can't we do it? We'll fall behind. So yeah, I get that being.
Yeah, and that answer comes back a lot. Or like some attorney 10 years ago signed off on this, you know?
Yeah,
and I'm like, who? When? 10 years ago was a long time ago. Are you still wearing the same hairstyle you wore 10 years ago? You know, are you still dressing the same, et cetera, right? Like things change.
Exactly.
and having, again, those relationships are really building, those relationships are really the key. That's the special sauce that makes the difference, because if your business partners trust that you are not just coming in as or lawyer, no, and you're actually thinking about the business as you're making these decisions, you're taking into consideration what this means for their bottom, for the business's bottom line, then they'll listen to you, right? Of course, those relationships takes time to grow and to build, and that's a different conversation about how to be an effective product counselor. But I think that's the main key, right? Also, it's being in the room, right? Being there in the room with the teams as they are talking through this, because if you're in there with the product teams and they're coming up with these ideas and they're saying things they want to try, then you can help at an early stage to say, maybe that flashing yellow box, every 10 seconds is not telling someone, buy it now, it's going to go. That seems a little bit manipulative. What about if you do this, or what about if you do that? And I think that's the other piece of this, especially without regulations. Don't just tell your business partners what not to do. Come with solutions, come with ideas, right? And I think as attorneys, the way that we've all been educated up till now, technology is going so much faster, right? We have, when we went to law school, and some of our first jobs were really about, this is the law, you tell them what it is, they have to listen to you, right? But that's not really the space we're in. So just like all the rest of the industries and professions, we also have to, as counsels, as attorneys, as advisors, we also have to adapt and grow, making sure to keep all of these different risk and analysis and business considerations, keep those in mind.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Moving on. Hana, have there been any notable legal cases or precedents related to these dark patterns or deceptive designs? Where the use of these patterns has had consequences for business or consumers?
Yeah, so quite a few. Most of the major companies have had some type of FTC. Now, I'm a U.S. based attorney, so I'm going to focus mostly on U.S. cases. Also, not to get into all the complexities of it, but the U.S. system is based on precedent. So, I know that some other countries don't base their legal systems on precedent, but in the U.S., precedent means that you can look at cases that were decided, and it creates its own law. So you can take what the judges said in those cases and then apply them. So although there's not a specific regulation, you can look at the cases, and that can help guide you as well. That's to that other point, Debarshi, that you were saying, in the absence of regulation, what are some other things we can do to find out how we can advise companies, or kind of like the rules of the road, right? So one of the big ones that's come up recently in March 2023, Fortnite. I'm not a big gamer, but I know Fortnite is a pretty popular game. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission imposed a penalty of $245 million on Epic Games.
Wow.
For use of dark patterns. And there were some other dark patterns. And what you'll see in these cases is that there's usually a main one that triggered the litigation or the complaint. And then you'll see that there are a lot of other different dark patterns that you'll see sprinkled around that the website was using. So a lot of times it's not that they were just engaging in one dark pattern, but there are several dark patterns as well, right? So the issue with in this case was that they were deterring users from canceling or requesting refund for certain in-game charges. And like I said, I'm not a huge gamer, but I do know that those charges can be substantial, right? For the hardcore gamers, they spend quite a bit of money. In 2023, also, Amazon was also targeted by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission here in the US, that they were auto subscribing customers into Amazon Prime without their express consent. So, that again, that's that checkbox that's clicked, right? They didn't realize that they were signing up for Prime. That would happen during the checkout process. Publishers Clearinghouse was a big one. That was also in 2023. Now, this one was interesting because they did a lot of things. The Publishers Clearinghouse, because I know this is a global podcast, Publishers Clearinghouse is a sweepstakes company. So they in the US, and they run sweepstakes. Oh man, they've been running sweepstakes for as long as I can remember. But they do these big yearly sweepstakes where you earn a lot of money. And they were using dark patterns to increase the sweepstakes subscriptions, and also the product purchases, because they also have products that they sell. They did this by using visual interference, manipulating phrasing to insinuate that users had to make a purchase first before they could sign up to the sweepstakes, which is not how it usually works. And then they also had other ones, the extra small font in gray at the bottom. We've all seen that. They talk about risk-free returns, but it's not, right? There'll be a cost associated with those. Not being honest about their policy on sharing user data. So that's an example of one where the FTC kind of focused in on one that was particularly egregious. And as they opened, if you will, Pandora's box, they started seeing all these other ways in which the company got into trouble. And also their email marketing practices, which that comes up quite a bit with the different email marketing. You see these kind of manipulative or deceptive kind of practices that happen. So we are focused mainly on, dark patterns is focused primarily on what's happening on the user interface. But as you see, it's that line between other deceptive practices is very narrow, right? So these companies will tend to go down one path, and it kind of snowballs from there. And then the last one, Google actually, the Office of the Attorney General for the District of Columbia brought a suit against Google, and they settled for 9.5 million. That was in 2022. And that was a little bit different than these other ones because that had to do with the Google using tracking location. They would use various apps to track and record a user's movements, even when they haven't given permission to do so. So that's an interesting one because, again, not necessarily typically what we would think about as a dark pattern, but it is part of the user interface, even though it's in, kind of the background where the user isn't seeing it, but it's still tracking their information. It's still, without the user's consent, right? Again, deceptive, manipulative, something that users may not have allowed Google to do had they been apprised of what we were using their information for.
Thank you, Hannah. I mean, for the Indian viewers, this whole concept of dark pattern suddenly became mainstream when in 2023 there were certain guidelines which were brought out, and then um, only after that there were a lot of discussions which started happening, and then a lot of these kind of these kind of user interface related practices started getting noticed. What And this is so important that this is a global phenomenon. Now most of the companies that we see today, they do not build keeping in mind one single jurisdiction, one single country. I mean, the internet has of course opened up all of the products to the whole world. So now for the viewers who might be just joining in, a little bit of a recap. So far, we have discussed a lot about what are these dark patterns are. I mean, how to identify these dark patterns. And then when we went ahead and started discussing about what are the kind of legal and ethical implications of these dark patterns on the users. and then broadly, what are the kind of legal issues which these kind of user interaction, user interface techniques bring in. Then we spoke about uh, what happens if, since they're in majority of the places, there is no one single regulation which essentially governs such kind of a practice. So therefore, what is a good practice for, say, an in-house attorney to advise their business partners when or when not fall into this? And we will delve deeper into this again further. And then we went ahead and discussed about some notable legal cases around it. So just give a small recap. Now moving on, Hannah, wanted to sense if there are any best practices or guidelines that you would suggest that the businesses should follow if there is something, so that like you said, it's a balance between being innovative and falling into this area of being called as a dark pattern when there is something out there. So what would be the best practice? Is there a best practice? Can you suggest something for the businesses there?
Yeah, for sure. Again, we talked earlier about just understanding what the business's appetite is for risk, making sure that that is discussed across the different, stakeholders. Make sure it's discussed amongst your legal team, right? Make sure you are aligned, you and your GC are aligned with the business needs. I would say that is critical, because from there, then any other type of assessment and risk and advising you can keep that in mind. And as you're advising the companies, to your question earlier, Debarshi, like, how do you explain this and how do you advise to companies that are, when there's no official regulation? Well, that's a good place to start. Well, we say we want to be a company that XYZ, and this is in our, mission, etc. Doing this way aligns with that mission. Always bring it back, or this will help us have increase our reputation, increase customer trust on the long term, right? So always thinking about it that way. But good, clean design, honest, transparent policies, simplifying the sign up and checkout processes. All these design practices will enable you to create positive experience for your customers and give them every reason to stick around. As far as the risk assessment, and we could talk a little bit more about it later, other areas to focus on. But I always ask myself a few questions. First of all, as the counsel going in, looking at some of these designs, but I ask myself these questions, but I also ask my business partners to ask themselves these questions too, because as much as we love to be in every single room, we always cannot be. So, as they're designing and as they're thinking through different ideas and innovating, right, which we don't want to stifle, you ask yourself some question like, does this design element smell fishy, right? Now, attorneys use this term all the time. Like, if it kind of smells funny, it probably is. But having your business, that's a really good term that the business partners understand who aren't legal, right? Does this feel a little shady? Then maybe you need to bring in an attorney and talk to them about it. Does it smell a little funny? Do you eat things that smell a little funny? I don't. So, these are things like that you should definitely talk to your business departments about. Is the element likely to confuse or mislead users? One of the things that I didn't mention before, but I think it's important to bring up is, particularly under the California privacy law, the CCPA or CPRA now, it talks about that even if the intent wasn't to deceive or manipulate, that is not always, it doesn't always matter. So even if the company says, well, we didn't mean to deceive the users, we were just trying to increase engagement, that is not necessarily going to be a defense, especially as these regulations play out, So then the better question is it likely to confuse or mislead consumers? Not to intend for it to confuse or mislead consumers, right? Does the design element clearly communicate the intended action or outcome? Do they know what they're signing up for? Do they know what they're consenting to? Is there something on your site that explains what this means? Does the design element obviously comply with the relevant laws and regulations? As we said before, we have the opt-in, opt-out. There's a lot of regulations on that, particularly with privacy and consent. So for those, for sure, disclosures, what needs to be disclosed on a website, et cetera, as far as paid, sponsored content, et cetera. Testimonials have very specific area of law about when you can use testimonials and how those work. So again, all these fall under this umbrella of dark patterns, but some of them have some more specific regulations. So making sure they understand when that nuance comes up. And then, honestly, does the design element prioritize the rights and well-beings of the users? I think is really a critical piece. And if your business partners can come back and they feel that, or as you're advising them, you use kind of those questions to assess risk and, get their feedback and help them understand other ways that they may be able to come to a similar result, and still be able to grow, right? Still be able to be effective as a business and grow, then I think those are very important to take into consideration.
Thank you. I mean, one thing that I have continuously, and this may be a little bit of a hack, not more than a hack, but most of these kind of features, before they get released, they at least go through something what is called as an A/B testing, which means that most of these use features would essentially not be internally just designed and released into the market. So there would be some people who would go on to use this feature, and who could be an internal user, a test set of users who might be using it internally, or additionally, there could be a sample set of users who are outside the organization who might be using it. Now, what happens is, majority of the companies, they might not want to spend that dollar amount in testing and doing that sort of a thing for minor features. And sometimes for very large features, there is this small bit of a curtain which comes up, which is the profit curtain, right? Which kind of hides everything behind it. So what you said is very pertinent, Hannah, that, at every point of time, the crux is that if people keep on, keeping their sanity and think from the point of view of both within the business and outside the business, from the point of view of someone who is a user, they might have an answer, right? Sometimes it's just common sense that, I might be getting pulled into something which I don't want to. Right. So just wanted to bring in that, this could be a hack, that while there is an A/B testing going on, have a small set of user who are outside the organization, but, under confidentiality, and get some feedback around it to state whether, who do not know what the other intentions are, do they think that this might look a little deceptive? Do they think that this might look a little, fishy? Like you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And possibly stay away from it.
Well, and that's really interesting to bring up, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the next thing we're going to is, what we can do as attorneys to make sure that the companies are kind of complying or following the rules of the road that we've set. But in that particular, user testing is really interesting, because I've been in so many meetings where we talk about, just again, not in my career, when they're talking about the data that they have extracted from these user tests, and they always talk about, it always seems to focus primarily on conversion, right? Or all the good things that the users saw. So it's one thing, to your point, have some type of user testing, absolutely. And I think that a lot of businesses tend to do that just because it helps them make determinations on what types of services and products they're going to provide and what the market wants, right? So I do think that happens more frequently. But what questions are they asking those users, right? If you're just going in and saying, hey, we did an A/B test and we saw an increase. You're gonna see an increase. You're using deceptive techniques,
Exactly.
but are you following up with those users, asking them how they felt about it? Did they feel like it was a little funny? Did they feel uncomfortable? And that's the piece that I don't see discussed quite as much, either because they're not asking it, or because by the time it gets down to the presentation, when they're trying, when different business teams might be trying to push their initiatives, it's just not, it's not the sexy bit.
I
Yeah.
absolutely. I agree. I agree. So I mean, maybe if you can touch upon on that point, that in this whole piece, right? I mean, most of the situations, most of the things that happen, that would have, before it lands up to an attorney's table, that you know in I mean, we would love to be always part of the whole discussion, right? But then practically it doesn't always happen, right? So it would come at a point when they have decided, the business wants to go ahead, and then they have landed up to you and say that, hey, now find me either those guardrails, or just tell me, okay, I'm okay to go, and then let me go, right?
Or they don't tell you at all, and you just open
Or
up the
then
website.
I mean, when they don't tell you, that's the toughest part,
Yeah.
Like,
right?
what? Um,
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's
for
a
sure.
clear gotcha moment. So I mean, I just wanted. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued to know now that, what could. I mean, how would you suggest your fellow attorneys to function, and how to bring in that sort of a balance when when working in such kind of a situation.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I think that any product counsel or legal team needs to consider, because of all these things we just said, and like I don't want to give the impression that I think the product teams are intentionally trying to do something. Again, it's not always about intent, right? Their goal is to help increase the grow the business, right? In whatever sense that means. Increase interactions, increase profitability, etc. So, you can't ask a marketing team to know automatically, they have this great idea, right? They have this great content. They have the designers have this great design, and you can't ask them to just automatically know. So part of that is the legal team having some type of consistent compliance review, right? Whether it's annually, whether it's quarterly, etc. I tend to look at the different pages that I support, right? Like the different sites that I support. And, I'd like to do it more frequently. I love to say I do it weekly or daily, but that's not realistic. But I do try to give a regular cadence that I go through the different, know your websites, know your business. Look at it, not just what you're seeing in the meetings and what they're showing you, but what's actually live, what's actually posted, because that way, if there was something that might have fallen through, or there's new regulations that came up, that maybe that was okay for the risk assessment or the risk appetite at that time. 10 years ago, someone said that was okay. Maybe it's changed, right? So have a regular. I think it's important for in-house counsels, particularly product counsels, compliance, privacy, to have just a regular review, a cadence of review of the different sites. The other one is, ethical guidance. We talked about that. Making sure that the business understands ethically, how stepping outside of this ethical framework can really lead to long-term reputational damage that's very difficult to fix, quite frankly, and to come back from. Risk management, we've talked about that. Policy development, us as in-house counsels developing our own internal policies, hey business, partner, hey engineers, before you do X, Y, and Z, here are some different things to consider, and not just saying it in a meeting and not just doing it as a follow-up, but something proactive to provide the business, something that checklist. I mean, there's so many different ways to do it, right? It really just depends on what works for you, what works for your teams, and it's also a lot of trial and error, right? We'll try it here, we'll try it there, but encouraging that, getting support from your GC and from, the other leadership cross-functional leadership and stakeholders to have something in place because it protects everybody. We as attorneys say, okay, we know that we presented this to them. They understand what the goals are. The business can say, we designed this keeping all of these different elements or policies, taking those into consideration. So no one can say, well, I didn't know, right? We've told you what the framework is, and that'll help them be more compliant, right? Help me help you, right? Training and education, making sure they understand, lunch and learns, office hours, etc. Taking the time again to build those relationships, and then just be generally an advocacy for user rights. We want our users, we want our viewers, we want our buyers to be happy. We want them to feel good when they come to our website, to trust our website, to know that we're thinking about them, because at the end of the day, that's going to make all the difference for long-term business success.
Thank you, Hana. I mean, that's really, really helpful for anyone working in house, especially in the product counseling side of things. Now, you've explained how businesses can manage these, right? You've explained how in-house counsels can assist businesses in ensuring that that we kind of stay away from these patterns. I just had one question, right, from the user's perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's a user who's encountering a dark pattern and realizes that it is a dark pattern. Is there a recourse, right? Is there an agency that they can go to? Where do they file a complaint? Does the company organization themselves need to have a mechanism where they receive complaints and then act on it? So could you shed some light there on that?
Yeah, it just depends on, well, I guess I would say let's put it into two buckets, right? You have, what if the user determines that they have been deceived or manipulated into taking some action that they didn't want to take because of a dark pattern, as a result of a dark pattern. What are the company policies in place, right? Are there certain refund policies? How generous are the refund policies? Because a lot of times if people can get their money back, it usually can stop there, right? Now, that's not excusing bad behavior. We're not saying do what you want, but give the money back easily, and that's okay. That's not the long-term solution. But as a user, what's most important to me? It's important that my data not be used and shared without my consent. It's important to respect my privacy. It's important to get the money back if I ended up purchasing. It's important not to have my email flooded with a gazillion marketing emails because I didn't unclick the opt-in box, right? So having really good internal business policies that assist users in those situations, I think is really important. I don't know about you all, but I don't know how many times that I've been accidentally opted in because I didn't find that click box. I'm inundated with emails and the unsubscribe never works. Like
I'm trying to figure out unsubscribe for a couple of my emails that I keep receiving. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's so making sure that not only should the business have policies to make user-friendly policies to help users navigate and resolve their concerns and situations that come up, but that they also work, right? If you put opt out, you actually opted out. These are very, because it's one thing to have the policy, as most companies do, but it's another thing that it actually works. Does someone answer your phone? Does someone answer your email? Is it even a monitored email when consumers send in complaints? So I think that's the first bucket, which is kind of your internal businesses having good internal policies. And the user would start with the business, because at the end of the day, they want to resolve what they feel was wrong, right? If that does not work, or if that's not the resolution, if that's not giving them the user the resolution they want, you do have a lot of consumer protection laws, and most countries have some type of consumer protection laws, privacy laws. So, in the US, we have the CCPA, we have the Federal Trade Commission, we have the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act. In the EU, they have the GDPR for privacy, the Digital Services Act, Canada, the Competition Act, and PIPEDA. I don't know exactly what that stands for. PIPEDA. Canadian attorneys, if you know what that acronym stands for, please drop it in the chat. Australia, they have the Competition and Consumer Act of 2010, the Privacy Act. The UK, Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations, the CAP Code. So most of these countries, and then India, I know they've been struggling to get a really good comprehensive privacy program in place. I know it's been a little bit of back and forth over the last few years.
We are
But
almost, we are almost there.
Almost there now. Yeah.
Okay, good. But as you mentioned, Bisaru, that they do have some guidelines in place to try to talk about and actually discuss dark patterns. And I think the guidelines, last thing I read was in 2023, they had the guidelines up for review. I don't know where it's gone since then. So yeah, for consumers who, they can always, in the US, it's very easy to file lawsuits. It's not as easy to file lawsuits outside of the US, but they can be very expensive. But, talking to different consumer protection agencies, there are also different maybe policy organizations, nonprofit organizations to help users who feel that they may have been deceived. They'll group them into groups of people and try to do a big class action in the US and other countries who might not allow class actions, but you can also, there's more power in numbers, right? So that's what I would say as far as that goes. But I always encourage anyone to start with the business first, document what you've done. And if you are not getting any response from the business, you can also go from there to government agencies to help.
I mean, the only challenge, unlike, say, in privacy, first of all, this term itself, dark pattern, companies do not want to recognize that, they have gotten into a practice of doing dark pattern. So while it has become cool to have some place where I give an opportunity for someone outside of the organization to come in and report if there is some sort of a privacy issue or there is some concerns with respect to privacy.
Mm-hmm.
But if this seems to be something which needs to catch up, that what happens if someone detects a dark pattern, but then before something to happen, they need to recognize that there is a dark pattern. And the company cannot say themselves that, there is a dark pattern that I have put in. So that's a challenge, that's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, right?
I agree.
But then the second part is very pertinent. I mean, if someone were to come in and if we've had a better term for it, right? And say that, my user experience is getting deterred or hindered because of a certain feature. So then I should also be able to go ahead and report my, say, grievance within the organization first. And if the organizations, the companies become forthcoming and give opportunities for people to go register their grievances, they might themselves actually, in some cases, through our discussions that we have realized, the designers, since they are working in, say, a small team, they might not have access to the whole gamut of information to understand that that was a dark pattern.
Sure.
Right? And they can actually protect themselves from a lot of lawsuits if there was a mechanism for someone from outside and coming and telling that, yes, see, for me this looks like something which is little inhibited.
Yeah, you make a good point, for both sides, for the users and for the product and engineering teams, like identifying what is a dark pattern, right? That's why I go back to that fishy smell for the product and engineering teams. Like, does it seem a little Would you be comfortable if someone's putting, this in front of you? Would you feel like you're kind of manipulated? Do you think your users would feel this way? And then for the users, maybe they don't have the legal words, right? They're not going to go, and say this was a transparency issue or urgency dark pattern. They're not going to say that. But what they do know is they felt manipulated. They felt, and I think those are very strong words, because if your users are coming back, even though they don't know the details of why they felt that way or what exactly specifically, they know they didn't sign up for Prime. They didn't mean to sign up for Prime, and that checkbox was clicked and they didn't see it, right? They know that the bill ended up being a lot, checkout ended up being a lot higher than what it advertised on the website. They were deceived. Then they might not be able to associate that directly with the user interface design that forced that to happen, but they do know the end result, which is they feel deceived, they feel manipulated. So, that's why consumer protection aid, any type of grievances you can file with your, federal or global or country specific consumer protection agency is a good place to start, because they'll be able to take your feeling and put the legal terminology around it to affect change.
Right. I mean, just to simplify it for the viewers, basically the first is, if there were a mechanism to go and tell the company, like for situations like unsubscribe me from the emails, that would be the first recourse. But if it does not work out, then go to the consumer forum, consumer court, or a consumer, wherever you get in these specific countries. I'm talking specifically from an India point of view. There are these consumer forums, consumer courts, because this is a consumer forum issue where certain product is deceiving into buying more than what you are supposed to. And if there it does not work out, then the other recourses which are there in further detailed laws, etc.
And Vishnu, just on that point, right? Just before, yeah. So in India, I mean, some of the consumer laws do require a grievance officer in India, right? And email address so that you can reach out to this grievance officer, and also prescribe timelines, right? But whether the grievance officers are equipped to really handle dark pattern related questions, that so maybe there are these processes if the companies are following, but this is something that needs to fall within those processes, right?
You
If we
bring
have that, so
you bring a very
yeah.
pertinent question, Debarshi. I mean, again, uh, sorry. I mean, this is something which we will have to keep on exploring. And I think this whole concept of dark pattern, like I said, I mean, before 2023, of course, there were within pockets people would have, of course, known. Otherwise, why would this guideline come out? And Hannah, as we were speaking, India came out with this guideline in 2023. But then since then, there have been a lot more of motion around what these dark patterns are. Can I identify a dark pattern? And then the further steps of, whether there are these additional, kind of regulations, where all to go, etc., will come up, right? So, Hannah,
Interesting.
I know that we have a lot to discuss. This is such an interesting topic. There are nuances with respect to how it works. It touches upon on so many different laws, privacy laws, consumer protection laws. In fact, it can touch upon on minute details within these laws itself. But our time is limited. We have actually exhausted our time and then gone 5 minutes beyond that. But then I would like to ask you, one last question, and this is basically a question, a little bit of an advice, okay, from you. Like, how would you advise, the companies essentially create this? I mean, finally, it is the owners of the companies, right? I mean, to create something ethical, transparent, etc., for the user experience. If in short, if you can give certain advice for these companies, what should they do? How should they create? And coming from a lawyer, that would be mighty helpful for them. Yeah.
I think that the most important thing for any product or engineering team to take away when it comes to dark patterns is think about your users. Be very, yes, transparency, making sure that your users are your bread and butter. Your buyers, your users, your viewers, they are the ones that make or break. You have nothing without them. You a company with no one there that once their services doesn't work, right? And so just anything that you're doing, there's so much focus on what the bottom line of the business is, and that has to be taken into consideration. But don't do it at the sacrificing your users, because at the end of the day, that is what makes the difference.
Perfect, perfect. Thank you. Hannah, we are so grateful to have had your time with us on this hot briefing. We want to thank each and every viewer who joined in. We do not yet see a question. It happens very regularly for us that we close on the sessions and then the questions come in. So, Hannah, there is this gentle request for you that please keep an eye out for some questions which may come out on our LinkedIn page. It happens very regularly that the
Absolutely.
sessions have had and then we get the questions.
I'm
So
happy to I'm happy to address any questions that come in. Thank you all so much for having me. It was really a great time and delightful, and I'm glad I can share a little bit of knowledge with you all and everyone else.
thank you. So we want to close on this Friday evening for the Indian people. This is a Friday evening, so go out, enjoy, and for people outside in US, may you have a great day, and then you can go out and then finally enjoy. And people from Europe who are joining in, you are just there in the afternoon, another couple of hours, then you can go out and enjoy. So, thank you everyone for joining in. We are so grateful for having you listening in. And these kind of interesting topics come to us only because you suggest. And then we bring in our expert speakers, and we are very grateful to our expert speakers who come in and speak on this platform. And this is a journey that Debarshi and I am taking continuously in exploring these key topics that the technology companies and people working in the interface of technology and law face. And we will continue to go through this journey. The next stop is on 10th of May when we bring in the next episode of Hot Briefings. Thank you very much. May you have a great time ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.